r/AskReddit. Students of Reddit, have you ever lost your temper with a teacher? What's your story? Oh yes. Art teacher. Final year of secondary school. This teacher had a serious problem with favoring the naturally talented students and just letting everyone else sit around and get on with it. She'd then criticize whatever those students did and moved on without any attempt to teach. It pissed off a lot of students, but she was quite disliked as it was, so there were never any serious altercations. No one wanted to get mad in a class where they could just fuck around and draw for an hour. Now, I'd been going through some personal problems in those final couple of years. Some bad shit happened in my life that altered me a great deal, and in particular my tendency to anger. I was a goody two shoes, head down sort of kid who never got into trouble, but by final year, a lot of rage towards the school had manifested because of how unfairly they treat us as students. One day, this teacher comes up to me when I've been sat working on a piece for 3 hours, and I'm feeling okay with my progress considering I've been out of school 4 months at a time. It should go without saying that I was not one of these students she fawned over, and I was chill with that. I just wanted to do as well as I could. She comes up behind me, glances over my shoulder, and says something to the effect of, "Well, that's not very good. You're not doing it right." And walks off. I lost it. Just completely blew up. I screamed at her, demanding to know what on earth she thought she was doing, saying something so hurtful and unhelpful. Where did she get off telling students that what they're doing isn't good enough without ever actually helping them once? How had she managed to get this far in her teaching career without once ever helping a student? A back and forth went on for a good 10 minutes, and my anger sloshed forth in a rage tide of fury. To add to the mental image, I was a chubby, 4 feet 8 inches, bespectacled white girl who'd received maybe 2 detentions during their whole schooling career. The teacher, a pale, fragile wraith of a woman, was incensed, but her voice was so quiet, she couldn't match my ferocity. Eventually, she sends me out. Everyone in the class is stunned. None of the usual jeering when someone gets in trouble. On the way out, a couple of people cheered me on. Yeah, I know the whole everyone clapped, but it was more just a few individual whoops, which felt really fucking good. At that school, when someone got into trouble, they'd have a teacher on call with a walkie-talkie who'd be wandering the halls waiting to discipline the student. I went and sat in the stairwell and sobbed for a good 20 minutes. Anxiety was screaming through every pore, you know the feeling. But I was incredibly lucky that the teacher on call was my dry as fuck, cynical science teacher. His eyebrows shot up when he saw me crumpled in the stairwell, and he sat down next to me while I had a further good cry. He asked me what the hell had happened. Through my angry tears, I explained the whole situation, and I'm still so grateful for his response. "Yeah, she's a bitch. You did good. I shit you not, that teacher stayed with me for the next hour just letting me vent. I think he might have been aware of my home situation, or at least saw there was a legitimate problem as I lost my rag so completely." Having validation from an authority figure confirming that it's okay to question that authority when it's not doing its job helped immensely. Long story short, GCSEs went wonderfully, but I walked out on my last day of proper schooling as another teacher decided to start screaming at me for forgetting a file on the way to an English class. Because of my science teacher, I finally understood that you don't need to take shit from people who are using their power to treat you in a way that hurts. You're as deserving as respect as they are, and they need to earn it first. I went to a small high school. My graduating class was less than 50. We all knew each other and all the teachers and administrators on a personal level. I was a senior at the time. I was essentially the mom friend of the group of bullied kids. My 2 best friends had both tried suicide at that point. One of them was constantly bullied. The administration knew about this and refused to do anything. I was also the golden child of the administration. I never talked back, never acted up, and was salutatorian. Seniors sat at the front during our school assemblies, and I sat in the very front row, middle. Near the very end of the assembly, the high school principal came on stage and started talking about bullying. They were going to start a 7-week-long program to prevent bullying. Okay, that's cool. Probably won't work, but W/E. Then she goes into a long speech about how she knows that bullying isn't a problem we currently faced and that this is only preventative. This was not sarcasm. She very clearly truly believed this. My best friend had to go to a mental hospital because of suicide less than 2 years ago at that point. I spent the entire assembly glaring daggers at her. At one point she looked down at me and noticed. We maintained eye contact for a few seconds before she very uncomfortably looked away. She had the golden child's disapproval and she knew it. When the head administrator got up to finish the assembly, he too started talking about how bullying wasn't an issue. He got the same treatment and had the same reaction. I met with her later that day in her office, and as calmly as I could laid out my complaints. She kept spouting the same bullshit she did earlier. Eventually, I just stormed out, which might not be an explosion, but for me then it was pretty dramatic. I hated her. My band teacher, he didn't direct shit. In middle school, there was a kid in middle school who couldn't play his saxophone. I mean, not a note came out right. He got called out a lot early on, so he just started fingering the notes as best he could to avoid derision. I played drums and watched all of this happen from right behind him. The teacher either never noticed or didn't care. One day, out of the blue, he does care. He makes the kid play something on his own. Surprise, the kid can't, so he stops everyone. He makes him try it over and over and over. Maybe 15 minutes into not making it past 3 notes, the kid starts crying. This isn't even hard, and I could probably have played this by now. It goes on for a while longer and everyone is quiet and uncomfortable. Finally, I can't take it anymore. I say, hey, kid, can you play that? Shakes head no. If we sit here the rest of class, are you going to be able to figure it out? Shakes head no. Do you promise to go home and practice and try again tomorrow? Weak nod. Alright, good. Now leave kid alone and move on. That teacher lost his fucking mind. He starts going red, starts yelling something at me, calls me something, and makes a vague threat. Something like stay out of this, or there will be consequences. Well, his wife had been fired from her elementary job because she had tied a kid to his chair. So, what are you going to do? Tie me to a chair? Everyone goes silent for a few seconds, and then one girl next to the teacher starts laughing her ass off. Everyone loses their minds laughing, even kid. I realize I said it out loud about this time. As an addendum, that first girl to laugh I eventually married. Edit, doubt all day, but this is a true story. Told by my best friend at our wedding, who was another drummer. The entire reason we are together is because of that interaction. She realized I gave zero fucks, and finally realized I existed. In her defense, she was a foot taller than me when we first met. Our 20th anniversary is in January. Edit, gold. Thanks to my internet hero. Only once in high school, and I was a prick about it. We had one of those Spanish teachers that loved Spanish culture, but not in what I guess you would call an authentic way. She was one of those people who go to foreign countries just to see how bad they have it and then come back to the States and openly shit on them for no reason. Immigrants especially. Being Mexican, this pissed me off, and we got in heated exchanges frequently. So she had this bullshit program called pesos that was 25% of our grade. If we earned so many throughout a span of time, we would get a certain grade. She pushed it as participation based, but it never really seemed fair. After one of her racist rants, I finally got fed up with her and started documenting. For pesos, every day I would write down the person, what they did, the time, and how much they earned. It was detailed enough that I could calculate their grades. I kept a record for 3 months. You could plainly see she was only picking favorites to boost their class rank. The tipping point was midterm week. Our exam in Spanish was a semester-long project that we had already completed. Since we had nothing to do during the 2.5-hour exam period, she made us watch a movie. I had an app chemical exam the next period, so I was studying for that in the room quietly. Eventually she sees me not watching the movie and starts trying to make me put my stuff up. I tried to reason with her that the exam was important and we weren't doing anything in the class, but she was just looking for an excuse. She sends me to the principal's office. Principal walks in, asks my side of the story, and then tells me I must not be telling the whole story. I tell him nope, and reach into my bag with the biggest grin I've had all year and present my notebook. I walk him through the entire thing. Every peso's detail over the past 3 months. The guy looks flabbergasted. He asks me to make copies and tells me to hold on to the notebook, tells me I'll need to have a parent at the school tomorrow AM, and lets me stay in the office to finish studying for my next exam. The next day my dad and I walk into the office. The principal and Spanish teacher are already sitting in a conference room. We start off just going through the situation and the principal starts grilling the teacher. Is there any sort of paper trail on these grades? Have you noticed you're giving more opportunities and higher amounts to students in your clubs? All of it. She goes on the defensive and my dad and I are wondering why we are even there. Suddenly she goes off on my father. Your son is targeting me. I am the victim here. This was all organized and I want to know if you had anything to do with it. It was straight absurd. Then she starts crying in front of all of us about her sister dying 6 months prior and how hard this year was. It was insane. My dad has no idea what to do at this point, but the principal calls it shortly after the tears start rolling. We leave the office and my dad just laughs when we get to the car. Come to find out she was put on a PIP afterwards. Her entire curriculum and grading system were put under review and her senior level classes were put on hold. Best part was that when her senior level classes were conditionally approved, she needed a minimum amount of students for the school to sign off on the class. Guess who was the last qualified student she had to ask? 3 professors. English professor made the entire class hunt down New York Times newspaper articles because she once won an award for doing that. Everyone in her class had to hunt down and cut up New York Times articles to put in our little diary entries. If you were missing even 2 of the 35 entries, you got an F on that entire grade. Doesn't matter if the other 33 entries were the best ever, you missed 2, they're all Fs. This isn't college English 2 BTW. 2. Computer science professor, who is head of the computer science division in this college. I took an online course with him as a professor. After a long delay after the semester started, like 2 weeks after it should have started, he finally showed us the 2 different sites he set up. One had all our hardware questions, one had all our software questions, and we had our college email app which lets professors announce to the class new assignments or stuff like that. Well, I go through the entire class super easy, and he keeps announcing jokes to the class. I take my screenshots just in case, and keep going through it all. Well, I get my final grade, an F, for apparently no reason. Well, instead of announcing a super important project that was worth over 30% of our grade, he kept announcing jokes, and I never had the ability to learn about this project that I needed to do. Got an F in that class. 3. Philosophy professor, also head of the philosophy division in the same school, wanted around 2 hours of work put into an essay for every hour of class time. Not too bad, but annoying. Well, snow days come, and now he wants 4 hours of essay writing to try and make up for the snow days, which is illegal where I am. Then he decides he wanted to do the final early and demanded over 6 hours of essay writing per hour of class. This would be okay if he was my only class, but I had 4 other classes and couldn't handle the workload. Also, his midterm and final were oral exams for no reason and graded you seemingly randomly on them. He had pop tests randomly too. He'd just walk in, put test, what is Socrates' art preferences, and kicked you out if you took out your notebook at all. Not just at a teacher, but at an entire department. The English department at my first college was staffed by people who, by and large, were assholes. Their idea of a writing workshop was having you email the assignment to the teacher and then making you pay at least $10 to print out enough copies of your story for the entire class. Why we couldn't just put it up on a message board somewhere? They were built into our school's online infrastructure. I don't fucking know. The teacher of this workshop also made it abundantly clear that he didn't give a flying fuck about his students. I'm pretty sure he was a grad student teaching the class for credit, but he acted like a major douche and pretty clearly didn't read any of the stories beyond a basic skimming. We took quizzes on computers, and he didn't give a fuck if we googled the answers, as long as we got it done before class ended. He drove one of his students to a panic attack on the last day because he had acted like such a creep to them, micromanaging one of their stories. It was bizarre. They also had this weird thing where they would gather every English major in the college into the chapel on campus every Thursday in order to have you listen to someone read from their work. It was advertised as creative writing common time, but it literally just meant sit down, shut up, listen to someone read their works that were ejected from a lit magazine. No laptops, no phones, no books. And if you missed one session of this out of an entire semester, you failed the class. And you had to take 4 semesters of this if you wanted to pass. By the end of the first semester, I'd had enough. I'd missed a session, and the MacUp assignment was just as bizarre. You had to find an audio recording of a work online, read by the author, and analyze how they read it. Like, what? It really got bad on the last day. Undergrad students were finally allowed to read, and either they didn't vet them at all, or they vetted them really poorly because there was a student who read a graphic depiction of a rape and murder, and the teachers just let them. A few of the other students in the building left in disgust. I almost joined them. Needless to say, I dropped out of the English program at this college and transferred to a university whose English department isn't staffed by psychopaths. Took me an extra year to graduate. Don't care. It was better than that. A couple of weeks into my senior year of high school, the president gave a speech about the importance of school or something. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention. Anyway, all of the teachers in my school had to set up their projectors so we could watch it. My math teacher couldn't figure out how to get a projector working. So, me being the nerdy kid, I offered to help. She had a fit. Started screaming about how she wasn't stupid and how I needed to just sit down and shut up. After a few more minutes of her failing to fix it, she pointed at me and ordered me to fix it. I said fix it yourself. She told the whole class to go next door to watch the speech in that teacher's room. When we got up to leave, she pulled me to the side and told me that when the class got back I was going to stand up and apologize for being so rude to her. I refused and went to join the rest of the class. She spent the rest of the year making my life miserable. She told me on several occasions that she was going to make sure that I failed her class. Sure enough, I failed her class. Only class I ever failed. Edit. Since people are asking why I didn't report it, I did. My parents went to the administrators, but they didn't want to do anything and said it was an issue for the math department head. The department head was a good friend of my teacher and took her side. The class wasn't a requirement for graduation, and it was the last semester before I was done with high school, so I didn't care to waste any more time on it. Edit 2. People are also asking how she can fail me at math, since the answers are either right or wrong. I would turn in homework assignments and she wouldn't get them. Students weren't allowed to keep a copy of the tests because the school was worried about test compromises, so she could basically give me whatever she wanted on them, and I couldn't prove anything. If there was a dispute about the test grades, the school's policy was to have the department head regrade the test. But as I mentioned, the department head was a friend of hers and found that all of the tests that I disputed were graded correctly. Whether or not that was true I don't know, since I never got to see them. So when I was in 7th grade there was an old English teacher who really shouldn't have been working with kids. Sitting in her class was like hell because everyone was walking in eggshells. To not be the one that she would target out for harassment that day, I would say she was in her mid to late 60s, and the best way I could describe it is that she was just fully miserable and took it out on her students. One day I did something to upset her, not really sure what it was, but ultimately I was a good student and never really did anything intentionally to upset the teachers. While I can't remember exactly what it was, probably because it was quite insignificant, I do remember the way she proceeded to treat me. She walked around handing out an assignment, and when she got to me, she just looked at me, gave me an evil smile and kept walking. Knowing I would take a 0 for this paper, I raised my hand and said, "Excuse me, I didn't get a paper," to which she replied, "Don't talk to me." I told her I needed a paper to do my work, and again she responded the same. I went off telling her that it was extremely unprofessional of her to tell a student not to talk to her and prevent him from learning. I told her she was disgraceful and that I was going to the principal. I walked out and marched right down to the office, where I told the principal, who spoke with my mom, and she came down right away to formally file a complaint. Apparently this wasn't the first complaint against this teacher, but since she had been tenured it was basically impossible to terminate her. She resigned at the end of the year. I'm assuming it was somewhat of a forced resignation, but either way, good riddance. As a mature age student taking on a second degree, I ran into an external lecturer who treated my class like we were 15-year-old children. The youngest in my class was 20 at the time, but has more maturity than I tend to have. Whatever, the external lecturer is a pretty big name in the local industry, so I sucked it up as best I could, no matter what condescending rule or lecture she threw at me. The first time I lost my cool was when I made a soft joke to my classmate, and she laid into my classmate for somehow inciting the joke, even though I had been fully responsible for the interaction. My classmate hadn't even responded to me. I tried to point this out, and the external lecturer brushed me off, saying, "It's done. We are moving on." The second time I lost my cool was a few days before our final. External lecturer had been making us practice drills a very specific way in our classroom, and was very particular about the specificity. We then moved into the actual venue for final drills, and all of us were fucking up one way or the other, because we were all stressed out of our minds trying to recalibrate to the new venue, while the external lecturer berated us on every little thing we changed that was not to her liking. Finally she stopped me in the middle of the drill and asked me very sarcastically why I chose to do what I did, and I answered that's how we had practiced it in the classroom, and I apologize that I cannot read your mind on how you would like to adjust it, but I'm doing my best. Silence for an eternity. She moved on to berate another classmate for another adjustment, and then finally she came back to me. "Don't you dare say things like you can't read my mind. Just do your work and actually try." I stood up taller and said I was trying very hard. That's what we were all doing, and it was very difficult to adjust to the venue to her liking without some guideline, and would her like to provide us with one. She told me to get out. I burned that bridge real good. I hadn't been doing well in calculus all year, but I was trying my best and just struggling. My teacher was one of the cool ones, the kind who act laid back and crack jokes and all that. I think this guy just thought I wasn't trying, and he was as frustrated with me as I was with myself. One day in class he made a sort of passive-aggressive joke at my expense, something about if you would just try harder. He didn't even say it in front of other students, just to me, but I was so over him thinking I wasn't trying that I got up and walked straight out and to the school counselor's office. I would have been sent there anyway for walking out in class, so I decided to expedite the process. She was really kind and talked me down from being so upset. Anyway, that was on a Friday, so I didn't see my calculus teacher again until Monday. I was hoping we could just pretend it didn't happen, but no such luck. He pulled me into the hallway to talk and truly, genuinely apologized. He offered to adjust his office hours, which didn't work for me, to give me extra help. He ended up helping me pass the class barely, but I still passed. I wouldn't have graduated without it. In retrospect, just talking to him more openly from the get-go probably would have been the more mature thing to do, but I was an awkward, self-doubting teenager who didn't know how to ask for help. In the end, the experience helped me improve that skill and advocate for myself. I still hate calculus though. 8th grade science class. God, I hated her. For the sake of this, let's say her name was Mrs. B. Early on in the year, Mrs. B had given us a science fair project due in January. We had several class periods over the course of those months as well to work on it. My project was creating an unbeatable tic-tac-toe program. Did work properly, but that's beside the point right now. Because it would take significantly longer to have 20 people, the amount of tests we had to do, each play 3 rounds with the thing. So I asked her if I could do fewer and she agreed, allowing me to only do 7 people, which I got done shortly before Christmas break, only about 1.5 school weeks until the project was due. I make sure to thank her for letting me do fewer, as I would never have gotten it done in time otherwise. She turns to me with this confused look as says something to the effect of, "I never said that, you have to do 20 trials like everyone else." I was so insanely furious, I even got a witness who had overheard her give me a lower number come in as evidence. Both me and my witness ended up in detention. I did end up getting the project done, but barely, and it was rushed as hell. I still occasionally think of it and want to punch a wall. Edit. Apparently I had a typo. I had meant to type didn't work properly, but the way it came out, not only do I sound like a humble brag, but I also started an argument later down the comment chain. Oop. Obligatory, not me. When I was in high school, a girl absolutely lost her shit on my math teacher. The way class generally went was we'd go in and he'd have the day's assignment written on the board. Then he'd spend the first 20 minutes of class teaching new concepts and going over problems. Then he'd give us about 30 minutes to work on our assignments, and he'd sit at his desk and answer questions. Overall, I really liked this style, but some did not. This girl did not. About 3/4 of the way through the year, she snapped. The class was no different than any other. He explained the new stuff and did some examples, and then said, "Anyone who needs individual help, just line up at my desk and I'll be happy to help." She fucking lost it. What do you mean that's it? I don't wanna wait in line for 20 minutes. Help me now. This is fucking bullshit. Fuck you. She was getting angrier and angrier. And to my teacher's credit, the angrier she got, the calmer and quieter my teacher got. And the calmer and quieter he was, the more furious she would get. Teacher, calm. I understand you're upset. How about we go to the hallway and talk about it? Student, yelling, "No, fucking help me with this shit here and now." Teacher, calmer, quieter than before. "Now there's no need for that kind of language. We can discuss this civically. I'm happy help you why way I can." Student, even angrier and louder, "Fuck you. Fuck this. I hate this fucking school." Teacher, still very calm, "I'm sorry you're so frustrated. What can I do?" Student, now screaming as loud as she possibly can, "Get fucked, fuck this, fuck that, fuck everything," incoherent screaming and cursing. This is when the principal walked in and took the girl out of class. The teacher left for a moment to talk to the principal while we could hear this girl screaming all the way to the office. Just every expletive in the book, all directed at the teacher. When it was all over, the teacher calmly walked back in, stood at the front, and said, "Well, anyone else have a problem with me? I'm happy to discuss it, if we can be civil." No one said a word. "Okay then. Anyone who needs help, come see me." Class went on like normal after that. In retrospect, that teacher handled that shit like a fucking pro in every possible way. Never saw that girl in class or in school again. So something had to have been going on to set her off like that. But I've never seen a student go off like that before or since, and I've worked as a teacher and sub for nearly a decade. Edit to at, something had to be going on with that girl, but I have no backstory. I don't know if she was struggling with grades, or with that class, or if that teacher said or did something to set her off I don't know about. I just know what I saw in class. I'm certain something was going on with that girl to set her off, though, either at home or school. I just think that math class was her last straw for whatever reason. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.